You are among 300 registrants from around the globe joining us for this quarterly panel discussion where we hold space to further the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging community. As we gather, I would love to hear from you in the chat. We've been asking about what everyone's favorite karaoke songs is. Thank you, Mimi, for that prompt. But we really like to treat these events as community builders. So let us know where you're from, share your LinkedIn profile if you like, let us know what organization you're with, or if you're between roles, that's fine too. If you know of any open roles in the DEI space, feel free to share that in the chat as well so that we can help spread the word and accelerate the path for people who want to contribute their talents to this incredibly important space. As you're doing that, I want to go over some housekeeping to help you have the very best experience possible today. So first, we encourage you to edit your name in your Zoom box and add your pronouns. You can just click on the 3 dots in your Zoom box. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, by the way, so you can edit your name and add those if you like. We try to turn on closed captioning, and if you see a little blinking on your screen at the top of the screen, we apologize for that, but closed captioning is fighting us on this today, so if that's not going to happen. I will tell you that we reserved 30 minutes at the end of the panel discussion to take your questions. So please put your questions for the panel in the Q&A box so that everyone will have the ability to upvote on the questions on what they would most like the panel to address in that last half hour. Also, our team will be dropping hyperlinks to supplemental information in the chat, and we encourage you to do the same to help us all to continue to build awareness. So if you have something you want to share that seems pertinent for in the moment, please feel free to share. We'll also be sharing the chat log with you as well. So you'll have all of that information together. And also you'll be getting a recording of this panel discussion as well as that transcript of the chat log. So we'll turn that around as quickly as possible. And my colleague Danielle will tell you about how to register for a brand new DEI training program that we are super excited to launch next week. Okay, so let's move into the panel discussions, and I'll get off and hand it over to the panelists. If you know about the Rockstar panelists that we are honored to host for today's discussion. If this is your first time joining us, it's my honor to introduce this esteemed group of DEI practitioners who have generously agreed to share their time and expertise with this community. So let's get to it. Casey Tonnelly, our moderator, has established a reputation as an innovative and passionate leadership development coach, anti-racism educator, and DEI trainer. Casey has been delivering attentive and dedicated program management for over 15 years, sustaining and guiding community initiatives, striving to support diverse and underserved populations. As you may have experienced, many people struggle to begin or continue their anti-racism and personal development journeys due to shame or guilt or fear. But Casey, and I can personally attest, provides a non-judgmental space to support learning, growth, and exploration using their expertise in anti-racism and bias minimization, and certifications in personal and professional coaching, mediation, and facilitation. Casey's dedication to creating an equitable world free of discrimination knows no bounds, and we are so honored that Casey is partnering with us today and is acting as the lead facilitator for our DEI training program. So welcome, Casey. I would be introducing Arthur Benjamin here in this space, and unfortunately he's not going to be able to join us today due to a family emergency. So we will send our very best thoughts out to Art, and I'm sure that he'll be back with us as soon as possible. From that, I'll move on to the indomitable Monica Davy. Monica, we want to congratulate you for being one of the 100 most influential African-American leaders in business. Congratulations to you, Monica. She is the Chief Culture, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer at Vizient, the nation's leading healthcare performance improvement company with 4,000 employees in 20 metropolitan areas across the United States. Monica guides Vizient's overarching strategy, program implementation, and provides ongoing support for the company's culture and DEI initiatives. I love that those two are combined. So congratulations on your recognition and welcome back, Monica. Next, we are honored to welcome back Sarah Hassaine. Sarah serves as the Global Director of Diversity at ResMed, a global med tech company based in San Diego. At ResMed, Sarah has designed and has been executing a global strategy impacting all verticals of the business and partnering with key stakeholders like talent acquisition, benefits, people development, and external communications. She's also a powerhouse community builder and sits on 3 boards in San Diego. She's a board member of the North San Diego Business Chamber. She's on the board of the Kim Center for Social Justice and Planned Parenthood of the Pacific Northwest. She was one of the founders of San Diego Tech Women Summit, and she still partners with them today with many women in tech community. So happy that you could join us again today, Sarah. And Mimi Liu is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Thermo Fisher Scientific, a world leader in serving science with a global team of 80,000 colleagues. As part of the D&I Center of Excellence, Mimi serves as the global lead for Thermo Fisher's business and employee resource groups and works with partners and key stakeholders across the company to develop and align programs that cultivate and advance Thermo Fisher's global D&I strategy. We are thrilled to learn that Thermo Fisher scored 100 on the Human Rights Campaign Foundation's 2022 Corporate Equity Index. Wow, for the 7th consecutive year. Amazing. Welcome back, Mimi. And with that, it is my honor to turn the program over to you, Casey.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Even as you were reading folks' bios, I just feel like my enthusiasm kept growing, as if it could have gotten any higher than it was. But I did have this idea of like, if we could ever get all the chats from like where the panelists have like been on here, I almost want to make a physical word cloud because I don't know if y'all see what's coming in here, but it's basically like, so excited for you all. Congratulations, you're amazing, super exciting. And for folks who are engaged in this work sometimes, especially leaders, it can be so isolating and it can be so heavy of a lift. And I just want you to know there's just so much love coming into this chat for y'all and so much appreciation, not just for what you do, but the brilliance that you're willing to share. So
yeah, good. I'm gonna talk. I'll be back. Have fun.
So with that, let's dig on in. So the first question is, share with us your biggest flex about something that you helped to accomplish in 2021 related to your DEI work, and what you're looking forward to addressing or moving the needle forward in your organization moving forward. For this one, let's start with Monica.
Thank you so much, Casey. And thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for all the congratulations in there. You know, most of us are really uncomfortable with that type of attention, but I appreciate the, the love and the congratulations. So, in this space, it's when you ask that question and, Sarah and Mimi, I know they join me in this. We rarely have time to like celebrate our successes because there's always so much to do, right? I started at Vizient, it'll be a year, March 1st. So I've been here, it'll be a year. And I think the thing that I'm most proud of, and I'll say 2 things that I'm most proud of from last year, is that, I started in March. And if you all can remember that time, it was when the country was really being hit with all the anti-Asian hate that was going on. And my rule to myself in entering a new company was sit, listen, absorb, and learn. Don't jump in and start doing things right away, right? But I didn't have that luxury in March. And we started having our monthly open conversations with the enterprise where we tackle difficult subjects around diversity, equity, and inclusion. In that March, we addressed the anti-Asian hate. Then in April, we had a conversation about neurodiversity. In May, my CEO said he wanted to sit down and have a conversation with me about systemic racism, right? And I definitely was not in my plan to have that conversation my third month on the job. But when your CEO is willing to spend an hour in front of, I think we probably had a third of our employee base, of our 4,000 employees listening in, it was an amazing opportunity. So starting those monthly conversations, I think that if you ask anybody within my company, Vizient, what has caused the most change in the company, it's those monthly conversations. I wish they could be smaller and more intimate so we could have more people participating. But in this virtual world where we can open it up to everyone, it's actually awesome that we get to touch so many people. So we are continuing those this year. We had one every month last year. We're going to continue them this year. And usually we bring employees in to share their perspectives on these issues. So it's a great way to build even cultural competency and cultural humility in our employee base. One of the things that I'm looking forward to moving the needle on, Vizient is a healthcare performance improvement company. And if I had to dwindle that down into a couple words of what that means, we have members that purchase things from us, like consulting services and access to data and all that kind of stuff. And our ultimate goal is to improve patient outcomes, right? And so that's a great connection to health equity and all of the attention that's being brought to health equity right now. And we are really moving the needle in that space. So we're gathering the data that we have from all of our member customers, and we are able to collect that data and create data points and lessons learned and how they can improve and attack all the health inequity that we face out there, right? So really excited about moving the needle in that space.
Thank you, Monica. I think something that struck me so much is how a monthly conversation, it sounds so simple, but when you continue it and you're consistent and you keep up the frequency, it can actually have a pretty powerful impact. And so that's something all of us can do. So I just appreciate that sharing.
It does. And then let me tell you what we added on to that. After each monthly conversation, we call them dive-ins for diversity and inclusion. And then we provide a dive deeper resource where if people want to continue the conversation within their teams, we give them talking points and questions they can ask, other resources around the topic. This year, we started something called Dive Deeper Dialogues. We call them D3s. And we set up small conversation circles. So anybody that wants to continue the conversation about what we talked about that month, we commit ourselves to having groups of 25, and we commit people on our team to continue the conversations with them.
And the amazingness continues. I do want to ask the other panelists if you have anything that you've helped accomplish last year and what you're looking forward to moving the needle on this year.
Mimi, I'll jump right in. So similar to Monica, and I believe Mimi, we all started new roles in the last year. I started at ResMed 14 months ago, and I walked into a company that didn't have an inclusion and diversity practice. And so when you ask that question, it's kind of like, wow, Casey, where do I begin? So similar to Monica, was starting something from scratch and having conversations with people who've never actually explored, what does inclusion mean? What does diversity mean to you? And starting to have these conversations with leaders, with our executive suite, with middle managers, with everyone across the business. I went on a bit of a tour, trying to understand where can ResMed go? And this was a big thing because it was about identifying the identity for what does inclusion and diversity look like at ResMed, and how can it evolve? Where can we take it? Whether it's our products and packaging, how can we look at our clinical trials? How can we think about our mass design, as well as our people practices, our learnings, our policies, our benefits. So it was really a thorough assessment. And so I'm really proud of, when you talk about the flex, that was it. It was really like across the business, what does diversity mean and what does inclusion look like? When I came in, we had 4 ERGs, and those are employee resource groups, and now we have 10. And I'm proud of that because kind of, echoing what Monica said about those conversations, I was able to build communities that could actually help me. Because I'm not here to be the voice, right? I'm here to elevate the voice. I'm here to help the voices in different communities feel like they have a place to belong. And so being able to build those communities so that when something does happen, we would be able to respond with a focus group, be able to respond with the right comms, as well as react and plan ahead of time. So having a strong, for example, what we call lean, our affinity group for our women and allies, being able to have a strong International Women's Day or a strong mentorship program, book club, all of that was because of galvanizing of people internally and bringing people together and building community. And that was important because 2021 was fully remote, right? 2020 wasn't fully remote, and we don't know how 2022 is going to look. But being able to build community and drive up engagement, where we were able to see an increase of over 10% for all of our groups, and see 6,000 ResMedians in 1 year engage in our initiatives, was just a really great, it was a great outcome.
Yeah, I guess I'll build on that. There seems to be a theme around conversations, connections, and community. Like Sarah mentioned, I'm pretty new in my role as well, about 7 months in right now. I walked into something a little different from Monica and Sarah. They're both really trying to build a lot from the ground up, it seems. I walked into a community of over 240 ERG chapters around the world. So it has an established ERG community at Thermo Fisher, 10 global groups, like I said, hundreds of chapters. But what I was really proud of, along the same lines of what Monica and Sarah shared, is those safe space conversations, right? We depend on our colleagues so much to hold those, to have space, to create that sense of belonging for all of our colleagues. And like Sarah said, it's not us trying to have it. And I know Monica doesn't want to be in the center of all of those conversations, but it's really our colleagues being able to create the space so that they have that trust, they have that community. So I think for me, the biggest flex for us at Thermo Fisher last year is looking at those groups and saying, 10 years since we launched the first group, where do we want to go from here? And having really important conversations around how we align with the business, how we align with strategies and initiatives that are going to make a difference for the members of those ERG communities. It's great that they have the connections and the community to have conversations, but we know our colleagues also want progress, right? We know we all want progress in society and in communities. So I think for us, it's really that strategic alignment. We're still going through that now. We just acquired another company, 30,000 colleagues. They're trying to integrate now their 8 groups into this whole mix. Has been both a rewarding and also, a huge take. A huge take on, but I'm so excited for the opportunity for us to really create impact through all of our employee resource groups.
The two of you, I feel like, just dropped a thesis of fostering a sense of community, but also in the effort for progress. I heard a couple of things that I really appreciated, Sarah, like you talking about elevating the voices of communities, not necessarily speaking for or to, but really lifting folks up so that they could share their own voice and their own story. And as well as that, MyMy, the progress piece, like fantastic. There is a space where people can let some of the armor off. They can take a breath, they can connect with other people, they can have that sense of connection. And people need to experience that outside their groups, right? And so like that part of like moving it out there, but I do not want to minimize the tremendous efforts that y'all have undertaken and the accomplishments you've already made. As we all know, this work continues. And so this is just entering its next wave, which brings us to our next question. So in January, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported a record 4.5 million Americans voluntarily left their jobs in November. That means there was 1.5 jobs available for each unemployed person, the most on record and dating back 2 decades. My question is, how has having a dedicated DEI program helped your organization to respond to the workforce gulf created by the Great Resignation? And I'm actually going to kick it to Sarah first.
Okay, great. That's a great question. This addresses the diversity part when we talk about inclusion and diversity. Talent acquisition, so I partner with talent acquisition, and this has really created more intention. Number one, coming together and trying to understand, let's look at the data for all of our organizations. Where's the attrition happening? What are we doing around retention efforts? With that said, are there some cool initiatives that we can pilot to different communities, right? Are we partnering with the right universities? Are we part of the databases? How can we expand our pipeline strategically so that we're reaching these people who are, exploring different career opportunities, and also just, being able to get ahead of the Great Resignation? Because the Great Resignation is just one way to look at it. It's also a talent swamp in another way. And how can we make sure that we are competing with other companies and having the right competitive advantage? So there's a lot of conversations around upskilling our recruiters on how to strategically source, on how to partner, also partner with hiring managers. Like, let's leverage the fact that we're all alumni from somewhere. Let's tap our alumni, for example, our peers in the community. And then thinking strategically through the candidate experience as well. Candidates are asking different questions now, and there's a lot of data on what people are looking for. There's a huge increase now. Candidates care about culture. They care about what you're doing for diversity and how they're going to feel when they get there. So I've put together a few toolkits personally the last few months for hiring managers and for our recruiters. I have a talking guide for our sourcers as well, and how to think about our culture, how to talk about our culture, and our hiring managers talking about the value of diversity and how to think about talent. When we say remote, it doesn't have to be remote in the same state. It could really be remote. It could be in another country. It could be in another part of the country. So really just trying to push mindset.
I feel like talent swamp is going to be my new, like, I'm absorbing that phrase because I was like, that is fantastic. And I always appreciate a nice reframe. Mimi, how about you?
Yeah, I think along the same line, Sarah's point about intentionality, that's what we really saw in this whole process, is needing to be more intentional about our talent, right, and our workforce. I'll touch on 4 things for us at Thermo Fisher that I think really worked. It's this multi-pronged approach. One is the targeted recruiting. We all have some version of that, right? Working with universities, working with HBCUs, working with associations, doing really targeted recruiting to ensure that we're bringing in not only great talent, but great diversity of talent into the pipeline. That's been important. We have initiatives like the JUST Project, where we have a commitment to hire 500 alumni from HBCUs across over the next 3 years, right? Just really putting that out there and saying, we're going to put our resources and our money where our mouth is, and we're really work towards those goals. The second thing is mentoring and networking. And again, this is not anything new. Every company has versions of this, but really, again, being intentional about our colleague population, where we see the most risk, where we see high potentials, and where we could lose them and potentially swap with someone else, but really creating programs that are going to address their professional development needs. Next, this I was particularly excited to see really took off at Thermo Fisher, is this focus on onboarding colleagues, right? We have a lot of work through especially our employee resource groups around really creating that extra touch point when colleagues join the business. How are we reaching out to them? How do we, again, create that sense of belonging, let them know, hey, there's people like you, we're here too. If you're stuck, this is a huge company to navigate. This is where we can go. Our African Heritage ERG, for example, put together an entire onboarding playbook for these alums. So as people come in, they're getting an email that lays out exactly all the resources that they need. There's a cute video in there. So those extra efforts to really help in the onboarding process and make people feel right out of the gate that they're a welcome member of this community and this company. And then finally, I'll touch on the belonging initiatives that we've done. I think this is key, right? No matter where we go, we just really need to feel a part of that community. And so here in particular, I'll touch on this example with our Veterans ERG. Last year was the 20th anniversary of 9/11. It was also all of the trauma and all of the emotions triggered by the exit out of Afghanistan. So our veterans in particular were going through a lot. So what can we do as a company to really touch on their well-being to ensure that they're really doing well? So our Veterans ERG simply put on an event that says your service matters, right? And it was just a space. It was for anyone who wanted to come to share their experience, know that they're not alone. So I think it's those little initiatives that are really touching on, hey, we're human beings at the end of the day, no matter where we work, we really need to feel that connection. So I think those efforts and being intentional about it has really helped us at least retain some great talent within the company.
So, yep, I can jump in here. We often hear the saying, people don't leave jobs or companies, they leave leaders, right? And I think that's a simple statement, but when you think about, and I'm really big on culture, and love that Sarah touched on that. I forgot who else said this, but it's a quote out there that says people buy into leaders before they buy into the vision, right? And I just don't think that we can overestimate how much our leaders, how they lead, how they behave, what kind of environments they create, that impacts our culture. One of the things that really attracted me to the job that I'm in now is that it coupled culture with diversity and inclusion. You just can't make progress in this space if you are not intentionally focusing on your culture. You've heard that saying, culture eats your strategy for lunch. It can eat your strategy, your innovation, your transformation, anything you're trying to do. If you're not addressing culture, then you're just not going to make the progress. And our culture is really determined by those everyday shared habits and behaviors, right? And how our leaders behave determine what type of culture we have. You have what I refer to as your macro culture, and that's how you recruit and you attract people. But the micro culture is what retains, and those micro cultures are formed by our individual leaders. So one of the things that we've been doing is really focusing on our culture. And this wasn't magic that I brought to the position. They were doing this before I got here. They realized, though, that if they wanted to make progress with diversity and inclusion, they needed to couple them. And that's where my title comes from, Chief Culture, Diversity and Inclusion Officer. You ask anyone in our company what our values are, they will tell you. No one has to look them up. No one has to think. They're be bold, be accountable, be inclusive, be purposeful. We talk about it all the time. We build what does that look like on a daily basis, and how we make decisions, and how we hold meetings, and how we interview. Everything is around these 4 values. And that helps build our culture. I also believe that, while there has been a great resignation over the past couple of years, our attrition rate hasn't changed. We still have low attrition. And I think that comes from really being intentionally focused on culture, right? You can put all this effort into bringing diversity in the door, right? And, the recruitment and the outreach. But if the diversity comes in the door and they don't feel like they belong, that they're valued, or that they can be heard, they're not going to stay. So I just think that we lose a lot when we don't pay attention to what kind of culture we have, and what type of leaders do we have in place that are reinforcing our culture.
Wow. I am so glad we got to hear from all 3 of you, because I feel like you kept building on each other and like connecting the dots in this really lovely way. And the idea too that there was a comment that came into the chat about Aaron, I believe it was, veteran, who was like, it's nice to feel seen. And how is that not true for everybody, right? And so it's one thing to be like, we see you, come in the door. And then it's another thing to say, we see you, we value, and we want to cultivate your brilliance. So I really appreciate y'all braiding those 2 together as well. So for our 3rd question, which delightfully we're going to have lots of time to get to our bonus question, what would you say are 1 or 2 areas that we are falling short in diversity and inclusion and belonging? And what would you recommend to CEOs and DEI leaders or practitioners to make continued advancements in the work? And I want to kick this one over to Sarah.
Nice. Okay. How much time do we have? No, I'm joking. So, the opportunity, there's a lot of opportunity. I think number 1, understanding how holistic inclusion and diversity is, right? So, I think the 3 of us are kind of like in a similar device, manufacturing, health space, really being able to look at it as a leader and say, this isn't just about people. It's about our market. It's about really championing health equity. It's about the overall value system, right? So we have our internal values. Monica listed off hers. They're amazing. But how do we actually project that as a brand, in our employer brand? Are we championing on the hill behind our health equity? Is it really actually impacting our customers, the perception, as well as internally. So of course you want our, inside your own house, but as well as think about how diversity and inclusion impacts everything that the business does and stands for. So I will say that there's that. There's also the branding component, how the language we use in our posts. Language matters, words matter. And we may not show up as inclusive as we think, right? We might not be missing like low-hanging fruit that really helps in terms of just the articles we may be putting out, how we say things, and the accessibility around it. The challenge with diversity is that it is so broad. So thinking through neurodiversity, accessibility, disability, all of that is amazing opportunities for us as professionals when leading these initiatives. But we really have to think through everything, and having leaders that can actually understand that spectrum and push their leaders to always ask the question, what am I missing? Right? So asking yourself every week, what more could I be doing? Are we inclusive enough? Are we thinking through all the questions that we need to be asking? So really having a holistic approach.
I want to open that up to the panel too to share.
I'll jump in here, Casey. I think I want to touch on the prioritization piece. I think all D&I practitioners on the call could agree, like there's just so much, right? And we're truly, if you're a CEO, you're a person of influence in your company, give resources, give budget, give headcount, because this work is heavy. This works a lot. We really do need a lot. But to build on, it's not only building the D&I team, but really making this a part of the company culture, right? I'm going to touch on that. It's interesting because we always say for me, and I've seen this at every company I've worked at in D&I, we have tremendous support at the top. We have a lot of enthusiasm from our front line. And then I know we call this the frozen middle, right? There's always that middle manager piece. And it's not because these are terrible people who don't believe in diversity and inclusion. They just have so much coming at them. So for me, one of the biggest opportunity areas and where we're falling short is we're not prioritizing this. We're looking at this as if D&I is something that somebody, some group, HR, legal, culture people, whoever that maybe is going to come in and do for us, right? And it's fascinating that year after year, this continues to be the case, but the companies that figure it out have really taken it upon themselves to embody and integrate D&I into every aspect of their business so that they're doing D&I. I always said, if we ever did this right, I would be working myself out of a job. There would be no need for a diversity and inclusion team because every company in their DNA is already looking at it from that lens. So I think, again, prioritizing, creating space and allowing and knowing that your managers, your people leader in the middle, they need help. They need guidance from you at the top to say, hey, if we say this is important, how do I help you create space so that you're helping your colleague have the opportunity to engage in activities, for you to be taking time to think through, your performance review, think about your hiring, but being intentional about the D&I efforts. I think we just need to really prioritize that and make sure that, we're giving people the resources to do what we're saying is important.
I agree with that. Thank you, Mimi and Sarah. I think that another thing that we kind of overlook or don't do well, and it depends on the maturity of the company you're in. I see some of the comments in here about some people who are just starting in the space and doing this work. You got to realize where you are. Mm-hmm. Like we've all done this job now in different companies, and what we did in another company is not going to work in the company we're currently in. Right. So you have to assess the lane that you're in, the readiness of your leadership team. But I think when you think about the maturity model, we use at Vizient, the Deloitte maturity model, and assessing where we were in the maturity model, being realistic about what you can accomplish. Right. Because you're right. There's a ton of things that you need to do in laying this foundation and to make holistic progress. But I think when you talk about an organization that's mature in the diversity space, they're not just looking at this work as the diversity of our people. That's an immature way to look at it. You got to start there, because if you don't have diversity within your organization, then, the work is for naught. So you have to start there. But it's more than just about, how many blue, green, or brown people we have. It's how we make decisions, right? How we engage with our customers outside. And so I think that and a lot of times what happens, I know we had this conversation probably last time, where should this role be put? Should it be placed under HR? Well, if you're on that maturity level where you're only thinking about DEI as the differences in people that you hire, then maybe that's the place to put it, right? But in the health industry that we all are in, health equity is huge. And so if you're not thinking about the diversity of the communities that you're trying to improve health outcomes for, then you're going to be missing the mark. We all know there's plenty of research out there that tells us that DEI makes organizations more high performing, more innovation. So if you're limiting it to just who you hire, you're really missing the mark on the benefits that DEI can bring to an organization.
Each of you brought up such fantastic, amazing points, and including like this, which I know many folks who are kind of newer and leaning in. That's so appreciated. Since we have a little time, I have a little extra question. If you don't mind, I'm going to put you on the spot, which is, every time you are advancing this work, there are potential roadblocks. And so I'm wondering if, like, in your time, both in your current position and like career, have you noticed like common roadblocks and then workarounds that you found or strategies that you've used to move past them?
So for me, in doing this work, and this was in the government space as well as in private sector, and I know this may hit on a hot topic, and so I'll try to be gentle. DEI has to have a partnership with HR, right? When it comes to diversity of our people, you have to have a partnership. And I tell people on my team all the time, HR doesn't need us. Like, they can go out and hire and recruit and give benefits and do all that without the diversity team. But we literally can't do our jobs without them, right? So that collaborative, well-functioning partnership is so important. But I realized, because that partnership is so important, that's a pain point in many organizations that I've worked in, that when there is not a good working relationship between HR and the diversity team, you're just not going to make the progress that you need. And so I think the solution for me is that relationship. You have to be intentional about building that relationship. If you're in HR, if you're under HR, sometimes it can be a problem because you may not have the voice or the authority or the pull. If you're not in HR, sometimes it's hard to build a collaboration. So I'm not saying that being in one place or the other is easier or better. No matter where you are, you just have to work on that partnership and be intentional about it.
I'll jump in. So the question was around kind of the challenges, right, Casey? One of the challenges, I've been doing D&I for 6-7 years now, and it's two things. Either you're not invited to the conversation, like they kind of just don't think that someone from the inclusion diversity team needs to be part of this initiative, whether it's a merger and acquisition, whether it's a building redesign, any of these things. Sometimes it's forgotten, like they're just forgotten. It's not malintent. It's just the company's adjusting to having this new initiative or practice. Oftentimes we sit in HR, but it's not necessarily just an HR function, right? So of course we have to have these strong relationships, but it's across the business. So I found sometimes that I'd find out about things like, wait, can I be part of this? Can someone from my team be there? So there's that challenge, as well as what falls to our department. Oftentimes initiatives are born and they're like, mentorship, let's throw this to inclusion and diversity. Oh, there's this, then there's this, because inclusion is so broad, oftentimes things fall on my desk and I'm like, I don't know if I should be the one owning this. I am an internal consultant. My team is we are a consulting team. We will partner with different stakeholders across the business. I don't think I should be owning it. And this is where I think businesses now are in this transition phase. And for a lot of you on the call, thinking through, what does your D&I initiative own? Where do you advise? Where do you consult? And I think that's a challenge I'm seeing. Mimi hit on this earlier, budget. It's a big one too. I feel like there's this constant fundraising advocacy that we have to do, and who pays for what, whether it's a talent acquisition effort, whether it's a platform, what percentage, or is 100% of it coming out of my budget? And so these are just kind of the two things that I wanted to articulate, because as businesses are maturing their D&I initiatives, it's really thinking through where should we be, where should we not be, what should we be owning?
And I think Monica and Sarah, you both hit the nail on the head. It's the partnership. It's like what is in scope for D&I and what really needs to be a partnership with the other groups, right? HR being one of the biggest stakeholders. And I'll say, and not to reiterate or not to repeat what they said, the risk of not doing that up front is huge, right? Because if you don't think about D&I up front, you don't think about D&I as another lens to the decisions you make, you end up having to address these issues later. And it's a lot harder to do that. You look, if you're talking about talent, you go down the line and then years later you say, why do we have this gap? We did such a great job bringing diverse talent in the beginning, but yet we continue to have the gap of diverse talent at the top. Well, if we're not being intentional, if we're not building in diversity and inclusion lens or consulting lenses into the work that we do, we're going to get stuck with the same old, right? And so then we could go back later and we say, how do we address that? And it becomes a much bigger hurdle to climb, to overcome, than to say, well, if we're bringing them in up front, what are we doing? If we know these are great talent, what are we doing to help them along the way so that we continue to diversify that pipeline and then we continue to see them in leadership? So, I think the partnership's important. I think having that lens is important, but the challenge of not doing that up front is going to be much greater than if you were to invest the time in the beginning.
Whew, such valuable nuggets there. I love the idea that everything, like DEI, needs to be in everything, in every aspect of the company, in every aspect of all the work. And that can't happen alone. None of us can do it in a vacuum. Like, it has to be in partnership, relationship.
We're pests. We pester a lot, it's so true, right? Because I feel like, and I think, I don't know if it's Sarah and Monica's touching, it's like sometimes it doesn't feel like we have, if you're somebody who needs like to check the box and get progress, this is really hard work. This is very nebulous. A lot of it's just constantly coming at people and saying, you know what, I just needed you to pause. I just need you to think about this. So sorry, Casey, didn't mean to cut you off, but I think of it's funny because we're like constantly pestering people, but we're doing it with good intentions.
Yeah.
But that's also why it's important that we not do our work in a vacuum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And think that our work is that we're here with our DEI work. It's really, and the mistake that many of us make in this position is that we don't learn the business that we're in, right?
Mm-hmm.
The benefit of us being diversity practitioners is that we can do this job in any sector because everybody needs this work. The duty that we have, though, is whatever company you're in or sector you're in, you got to learn that company's business so you can make the connection for them about how DEI can make their business better. So the onus is on us to make sure we're learning the business and improving our value to them so that we can get that seat at the table.
I appreciate you saying that, Monica. I actually struggled when I first got to ResMed. There was no time. I feel like, we have so much. And I think a couple months in, I was like, wait, I don't even know. I haven't even touched our product. I don't even know about ResMed. And so really you have to carve out that time to really understand what it is that we're doing outside of the strategy that you're trying to build.
I also love the reminder of like, it's not just always like DEI practitioners going into a space and being like burrowing and trying to drill in, but it's also that piece. And I love the responsibility part, right? It's that responsibility to also learn, like, how does this dot connect? Where are there opportunities? And then building that relationship. We have a little bit of time for the bonus question, which will be a juicy one. And I'm going to start with Monica, but asking, are you seeing any trends in DEI work? And what, dare I say, predictions would you make for the future direction of the work?
So the trend that I see is it's an unfortunate one, and I think it's just reflective of what's going on in our country right now. We've just become so polarized on many issues, but what we talk about in the DEI space, whether it's bias or privilege or systemic racism, those concepts that in this space we believe are either scientific or factual or not debatable are now up for debate. right? And our country has become so polarized that if we had resistors in our companies before that maybe weren't on board with what we're doing, they would quietly, maybe passively talk to a couple people about not being on board. But now I think I'm seeing a level of boldness with expressing their discontent, displeasure, dissatisfaction with the work that we're trying to do, right? You see it in the banning of books that literally just document history, right? Literally document history. A couple of weeks ago, there was a post in Glassdoor about our company, and the person just went on a rampage against the work that I was doing, called me the chief woke officer, and literally, like, the words were thrashing around talking about privilege and race, justifying her useless existence, right? Now, I have thick skin. I'm sure Sarah and Mimi have the same thick skin that I have. That's part of this work. We know we have people who are not supportive of the work we do, but there's a level of boldness, I think, that has come into play where we are just hearing more resistance, or at least I am in the spaces that I'm doing this work. And we now have to deal with that, right? Whereas before, we talk about the frozen middle and trying to get leadership buy-in. Now you have like outright naysayers saying you can't use the word bias, which is a scientific word about how our brain works, right? Or even privilege, which to me just means you don't have to think about something, right? It's not about telling anybody they're wrong. It's just talking about facts and what exists and explaining this work. So I think that's a new level of challenge that we have to deal with. And I want to be optimistic about the future. I do feel like we are going a little bit backwards in this country, in this space. I can tell you 5, 6, or 7 years ago, I was talking much more about inclusion and how we should just create inclusive environments, not trying to defend whether or not something happened in history, right? So I'm hopeful that it'll get better, but I sit patiently and wait.
Monica, we'll nod our heads. We definitely have seen a boldness, but I would say I probably have a little more, I have optimism in this space. And I want to touch on the fact that I feel like all of that is driving more courageous conversation, really, really uncomfortable conversations, but is really driving it. And I'll touch on this too, which is, again, one of those things that has completely polarized or become completely politicized, is this, the movement of Black Lives Matter, right? It is a movement. If you understand it, if you are somebody in the space and you read and you understood the intent, you know what it is about. But just as an example, for Black History Month, one of our sites wanted to hang the flag. White male leaders that said, I want to make this gesture because it's meaningful to the Black colleagues at the site. I said, great, I love that you have that. Have you talked about what this is? Right? Because doing this grand gesture may mean one thing, but all that is going to trigger a conversation that is not healthy. It's not beneficial. It's not going to drive us towards progress. So this might be an unpopular opinion. I remember I reached out to Sarah. Sarah's part of my little group that's like, time out, need help. What are you doing here? But we literally said, we got together and, you know what, it's a good gesture, but it's not the right time. And this goes back to where Monica said, where are you as a company in your journey? So we reached out to the leaders there. I said, look, I love that you're doing this, but if we're not able to have a conversation around what that Black Lives Matter means to people, and all that's going to do is trigger conversations or in a negative way or trigger sentiments that's not going to be helpful, we have done ourselves a disservice. So yes, it sucks a little bit. I agree with you, Monica. There's this boldness, there's this resistance, but at the same time, I feel like it forces the conversation, right? So now I can go out and then say, well, if it's not comfortable, if it's not right, what do we do about it? Because believe it or not, our colleagues are asking for it. And for all the leaders in the room, whether you want to address it or not, it's happening. Colleagues are having these conversations. They might not be talking to you about it, but be bold out there. Know that there's resistance, but I'm optimistic because I feel like the trend is that there is a desire to really just push, right? It's tiring work, but there's people pushing along for progress.
I mean, I think Monica and Mimi summed it up perfectly. I'm not going to add to those points. I will say I agree with Monica. I feel the same way so many times. I listen to the news and I feel like we are going backwards. But at the end of the day, a lot of us in the D&I role, we are global. And so what we're thinking about in America, when I talk to my colleagues in Finland, I was literally told by a colleague there, we don't have diversity in Finland. And so when I talk with them and I roll out programs there, it's very different. And so I think we are always pushed in this space to think about diversity and inclusion differently on a global scale. And so there are opportunities to take away stigma, or reduce stigma, I should say, around disability, talk about LGBTQIA. So when we think about the opportunities, there's so much that we can do. And there's growing trends. I know just the work I'm doing in Asia, talking about disability and LGBTQIA is huge, because these conversations were not being had a few years ago. And it's great to be part of and be in that space now. Conferences are being had. And so it's great to be able to be pioneering when we talk about inclusion as a company with conversations that are a bit different. I do want to touch on two more things, because it's not just social justice issues, but there's also mental health. I've noticed, at least on my end, mental health has become more part of what my ERG is doing. The conversations we're having, we held more events for like Global Disability Awareness Day, Disability Awareness Month last October. We really addressed mental health, taking care of yourself. And I appreciated the Black History Month theme this year, this February, was around wellness and how taking care of yourself translates to your performance, to how you feel, to how you show up. So I think we're going to see more of these integrations around, how genuinely how you show up and feel, and mental health, and also how that's going to really make companies think through their hybrid model and taking care of their employees, and what does inclusion even look like? Companies, some are returning, some aren't. How are teams going to define what days you come back? And if people are choosing not to come back, how do you make sure that they feel included, whether they're vaxxed or not vaxxed? So there are lots of layers of this onion we have to peel back to make sure that people feel comfortable, whatever their beliefs and whatever their lifestyle, to make sure that they all feel that they can contribute no matter where they are. And I think being in a hybrid model is really going to present new challenges. I'm part of these conversations now, and a lot of times we just find ourselves staring at each other because we're just not sure how it's going to feel and how it's going to look.
Thank you all so much for sharing so much insight of your experience, and also like dropping some knowledge bombs on us, as well as giving us some good nuggets to think about. We are now at the point where I'm going to turn it back to Sherry, who is going to help bring up some of the Q&A, the questions that came up in the Q&A.
Wow. Thank you so much. It's all I can do, not just like unmute myself and go, yes, that was awesome, amazing. It's just, I always get so much information from you, and I so appreciate your passion, your transparency. I love that we've created a safe space for you. There's so many great comments in the chat that's pouring out. Love to all of you. So thank you so much. We always, this is one of my favorite days of the year, and with some of my absolute favorite people in the world. So thank you all for that. Of course, we have a ton of questions, and thank goodness for the upvote ability, so that I don't have to try to rank them. But I will go ahead and we'll try to get to as many as possible. The first one is, you can pull up if you like also in the Q&A box, but it's from Jared. Jared asks, do you have a tool for assessing organizational culture that you really like, especially one that has a DEI lens embedded in it? So anybody in particular, just shout it out.
So yeah, I can share. We use Culture Amp for employee engagement survey. I can't remember how many questions it has. Somebody help me if you know. But we segment the questions. So it's a survey that goes out to all employees, but we take certain questions and it gives us a culture index. We take another set of questions, it gives a leadership index. Another set of questions, there's a D&I index in there. And you can segment the responses by race, by gender, by tenure, by generations, any way you want, and you can slice and dice it. So I think it's important when you're doing a culture survey or an employee engagement that you look at the different demographic groups and how different demographic groups are actually experiencing your company. And I think Culture Amp does a great job with that.
Terrific. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think Culture Amp is great. We use Glint. It's very similar. We do a culture survey twice a year, and they have embedded questions for different, leadership. And so I have about 5 questions that I ask. And so definitely it's GLINT. I definitely recommend that as a great tool to consider.
Terrific.
I'll touch on surveys. I think I saw that in the chat earlier. I think that the internal surveys that Monica and Sarah are talking about absolutely do that, do the intersectionality slice and dice. But someone had asked about the Disability Inclusion Index. I found these external surveys are also really good, right? We're doing one right now where we're like, ooh, we know where we're going to land here. But just based on the questions that is being asked of companies, if you want to be a disability friendly employer, or if you want to be, XYZ friendly employer, seeing those questions will help you understand how far away you are from what is expected or what you should be, right? These benchmarks. So I would recommend getting involved in some of those surveys just to get a scorecard.
Love that. Casey, feel free to just jump right on in if you have anything that if you want to add, feel free. I see you nod and no right now. Okay, we'll move on to question 2. This is like the lightning round. So Lori asked, when getting started, which all of you have done, building something from nothing, did you do that yourself? Did you hire a consultant? Did you follow a specific framework? Lori says that we are looking to start with our mission and vision statement, as well as leadership accountability, and then how we communicate that internally and externally. Curious how others have gotten started and what worked and what would you have done differently? Good question, Lori.
Go ahead, Monica.
Go ahead, Mimi, go ahead.
I was going to say something you mentioned earlier. I think the first thing is looking at where you are as a company in your journey, right? I think at every company where I've done D&I, it's been different. So if you're starting off, my very first stint into D&I, I was a volunteer. I was running a diversity and inclusion council, completely volunteer at the side of my desk. But that helped me see where the company is as a whole, right? We were able to introduce some of the topics, the educational topics. We were able to work on some of the pillars that have been set. But really, without the company having the infrastructure, you can't do a whole lot, right? Because I think first thing is assessing where you are as a company, how much you think you can take on. I always say there's a million things you can do to change the world. When you look at your company priorities, you say, okay, here are the 10 things we'll focus on it. Then you look at your D&I budget and you realize you can do 3, but at the end of the day, you really maybe did half a thing a year. And that's okay. But it's just understanding that don't try to tackle all of it. See where the interests are, where the company is in its journey, and start with a small piece, even if it's just like basic unconscious bias education, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of times I agree with all of that, and figure out what maturity model you want to use, do a SWOT analysis. If you need to hire a consultant, if you have the money, do it. I think sometimes what we miss and what's important is the self-work that has to be done with everybody, right? And one of the things I love about what we've done at my company is from the CEO to his direct reports on down, we have people to identify what's your why in the space, because everybody has a different why. Are you doing this because the CEO has declared we're committed to it as a company, or are you doing it because you personally want to grow and learn? And whatever that why is, just own that, right? So I think that's part of the individual work. I think definitely you have to figure out where your company is on the maturity model, but also you got to start that self-work, and it's important for everybody to do that introspection.
Nice. I love that. I remember our panelist in our October webinar, Martina Winston, said, don't try to keep up with the DEI Joneses. I love that. It's so great, because your company, your organization is your organization. And yeah, there's a lot of great things to do, but you need to, use a data lens and figure out where you really are. That's all terrific. Wonderful. Thank you. Rhiannon asks, for those of you who open up discussions and feedback to your organizations, what do you do when people don't show up or engage in feedback at all? Good question.
So I think that we shouldn't overlook. We have to make sure that whatever topic we're choosing, right? And how we engage in that topic, you have to put a lot of work into that, right? So at my previous organization, when I first started doing this, I decided, we were bringing people into a room. These were small groups. Again, like Mimi said, where's your organization? What are they ready for? So my last organization, I was not going to start off a conversation about white privilege. They weren't there, right? So that would have been foolish. Yeah. So I started off with something that was kind of soft, and literally started off with and many of you have probably seen this TED Talk. It's one of my favorite, The Danger of a Single Story. I know you all have probably seen that. And just talk about, just we play video and just talk about it, right? So I think planning to make sure that you have topics that won't scare people, that won't frighten people. And if you start off too strong and too hard, people may tune you out. So you have to understand where people are and be intentional about the topics that you're choosing for people to come, and realize sometimes you're going to have 1,000 people, sometimes you may have 20, right? But if you can reach 20 people, that's still an impact that you're having, right? And they may go and talk to other people.
Nice.
Yeah, I always tell my team, let's celebrate who does show up and who does support, because it's really important to not get too caught up on who doesn't show up, who doesn't engage, but really kind of focus on the messaging, how things are framed, how we're saying things, how do they land. And so that's I think what's key. And it can bring you down sometimes. When I was at Qualcomm, I would do events sometimes, maybe you'd only have 30 people. And I'm like, wait, the last event I had, 3,000. How does this work? And you have to keep in mind that there's always so much going on in people's lives, and things are not personal. And people have, one thing I'm trying to work with the business on is giving people permission to engage. And having leaders also have giving themselves the permission to engage. And so there's a lot of work when we talk about showing up or engaging. What does that really look like? And how can your stakeholders support you in having them also ally and champion and help in helping employees show up and support?
Can I add one more thing, Sherry?
Absolutely.
Figure out who your influencers are.
Yeah.
And make them part of the conversation, right? Because if someone says, oh my gosh, I love Sarah, I hear she's having a conversation today, people are going to come because people love Sarah, right? And I'm like, oh, on Tuesday, I'm having a conversation with MyMy about, privilege or about bias or whatever it is. People who MyMy influences are going to be there, right? So that's how I think you bring people into the conversation that are your influencers in your organization.
Love that. Love that. Excellent. Anything to add, Casey? No? Okay, I'm going to move on. Let's see. Lenarda is asking for someone new looking into entering the diversity and inclusion position. Excuse me. What are some pointers or advice to help one succeed?
I can start here, as I feel like there is no diversity and inclusion degree that you can get, and we all started somewhere. Volunteering 100%. I don't know Monica and Sarah's story, but I know for a lot of practitioners, it was volunteering on an affinity group, an ERG, a council, what have you, just getting involved and showing up and being part of those conversations, right? That's the first thing. Then from there, I feel like take on some opportunities. Every single one of these councils and groups and every company needs help, needs somebody to say, all right, I'm willing to put in the effort to help drive the conversation forward or do the event or what have you. And then if you are serious about the space, really keep up with the topics, the conversations, right? Literally today, like I learned from my colleagues that there's a good population that don't want to be called Black, that they prefer African heritage. That's something new for me, right? Because for a long time, I was taught by another group that says, call me for what I am. I'm proud of that. So it's a constant journey to learn these conversations, these topics that are evolving as society evolves. And then finally, if you do get into one, this goes back to, again, where is the company in terms of this D&I journey? Every company does D&I a little differently. It focuses a little differently. So you have to know when you're coming in, are you somebody who's going to want to partner on a company working on its culture? Are you wanting to work on a company that is really looking at its representation data and really focus on hiring or development? So I think looking at where your particular focus areas are, doing some research around what the companies are in their journey, but for sure, staying up, keep learning. Like there's no perfection. Nobody gets this. Nobody does it right. And I feel like every day I'm still learning. And that's how I really keep myself trained from ready for this work.
So this is one of those areas that gets me a little bit, because I think there are three things that you need to have to be a great DEI leader. Three things you could have to be a great leader. One is passion. Lived experience can help. I think what we assume is that if you have passion or if you have lived experience, that's good enough, right? Well, we would never make that assumption about somebody that we're making the CIO or the CFO, right? there are technical skills that you need to do this work, right? I saw somebody mention project management. I think change management is important. I think being political savvy and being an influencer, knowing how to negotiate, communication skills are important. So I just hope we get to a place where people or corporations see this work important enough and critical enough so that we don't just put people in these jobs because they're passionate or because they're brown or because they are a woman. And we make the assumption that that's enough. And we really, so if you're interested in it, yes, I think passion is good. I think lived experience is good. I think volunteering is good. But you got to get the skills that are needed to make, because this is hard work. And your passion and your lived experience is not going to be enough to make the change that Mimi and Sarah and I are trying to do within our companies.
So well said. Yeah, so well said. And having been in these conversations, even over the past 18 months, there has been an evolution in the the taxonomy, the words that we're using, even, what Mimi mentioned today in terms of, oh, I didn't realize that. Thank you so much. So you're always needing to, update your own operating system as you go. We are, by the way, at the end of this, in the last couple of minutes here, we are launching a DEI certification training program that Casey actually is going to be acting as our lead facilitator on. So stay tuned for that. If you can't stay tuned, then you'll find it in the chat log tomorrow. So we're super excited about that. We really took our time to put that together, build it a really well-defined program, and it's amazing. So I can't wait for Danielle to be able to share that with you. Moving on to Colleen has a question about what internal infrastructure, good question, what internal infrastructure is necessary to advance ERG's work and initiatives? What internal infrastructure is necessary to advance the ERG work and their initiatives? Anybody have an answer to that? Colleen?
I can go. I think it's important that ERGs have executive sponsors. I think that whatever strategy they have in place, it should align with the DEI strategy and they're not out there doing their own thing. We use a model called the 4C model where they're focused on culture, career, community, and commerce. And we require them to, whatever programming they have, that they align with one of those 4 C's. And then they have to build their strategy around our strategic pillars that we have. I think that we can't overestimate the importance of an executive sponsor. We've layered in this year also a network champion so that they can make sure that they have the support that they need within the company. I also think it's important, if you don't pay your ERG leaders, some people are doing that. We don't do that yet, but some people are doing that. Making sure that they get credit for the work that they're doing in their performance evaluations. So allowing them to put that in their performance evaluation write-ups because, they have day jobs and it takes a lot to do the work in these ERGs.
I love that.
I'll add a little bit to that too. Having kind of bylaws in place and a lot of templates around, how to design your project plan, how to think about the corporate strategy and how your ERG fits into that. And whether you're a business resource group or an employee resource group, and really understand what is your objective? Are you trying to help attract talent? Are you trying to build culture? And really kind of figure out what is the ERG's mission. And not all of your ERGs are going to have the same mission because every community is going to have different needs. Some is more about building communities, some is more about professional development. So I think, having the understanding, so having the framework in place, having them understand with and align with their executive sponsor. So I have my ERG leaders meet with their executive sponsors quarterly. They meet with me monthly, and then we all meet together every month. And so there's a constant knowledge sharing. And they're in a shadow program with each other. And so I put them in buddy systems so that they learn about one another. They see what's happening, what are some of the initiatives that they're each working on, or challenges, or what's flowing, what's not, and so that they can also serve as each other's counterparts because they also need support from one another. And so building that community for just the leaders, I've seen work really well, having our own Teams channel, having our own email list, so that they can also ask, hey, can you help me promote this? Hey, does anyone have any ideas on this? I've also had them partner with brand, and I've asked for a certain percentage of time from brand to help us with designing our flyers for their events, to getting their messaging out. And so making sure that they feel that they have support across the business is really important, and that the business also knows that these ERG leaders have high visibility and that they're driving a lot of engagement at the company. And so making sure that they feel supported also has been key.
Love that.
Yeah. I'll add to that. I think critical mass is important. Like oftentimes, I think when I first started in my first 6 weeks, I probably had 10 different people come up to me and say, I want to start an ERG. Said, okay, have you talked about it? So what do you want? And, you know, and the alignment's important because I was literally getting like Bible study groups, and I was getting, you know, bike enthusiasts and biking. So you have to understand where it aligns and make sure that's really aligned to what's in scope, right? Because otherwise you're going to be like Sarah going, I don't think that's part of my job. I love what you're trying to do, but it's not in my scope. So I think having the colleagues do some work in terms of gathering enough people who are rallied around what it is that they want to influence. And then the other one that I'm now seeing firsthand is, I'll say, making ERG mainstream as an infrastructure that is so necessary, because I've been at companies where there's councils, there's ERGs, that's all great. That's like the kumbaya people, right? Because the rest of the business just thinks, I have way too many things to do. I'm doing important work. I can't volunteer my time here. What I will say is really encouraging at Thermo Fisher is because there's a culture now, 240 something groups around the world, it's mainstream. It's what the business looks to the ERG to do. They no longer have to go and prove why they exist. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still pockets where we definitely have people who don't have all of the support to go get involved, right? But the ERGs aren't having to sell the business case on the ERGs as much as I've seen elsewhere. So if you're serious about doing this, please make sure not only the sponsorship, but the entire company really treats, you know, ERGs as a mainstream thing, that this is not a nice to do, but it is meeting a real business need.
Love that. Kind of, if you don't mind, I want to kind of follow up. Monica, you talked about, you know, passion is great and lived experience is great, but what about any skill sets? Are you asking people who want to start ERGs to, you know, have a certain, you know, skill set or training or anything at all, or is skill set and lived experience okay for ERG leadership?
Well, I do think it's okay for starters, right? But one of the things that we put in place this year, we just developed a new, it's a leadership assessment. Like what we've stated are, here are the leadership attributes that we want every Vizient leader to have. Mm-hmm. And you get to assess yourself around those attributes, and your manager gets to assess you around those attributes. So we've just put in place that for our new ERG leaders, we want them to take that leadership assessment. Nice. And for people who are in our leadership development programs, we want to kind of create an avenue so that they can be leaders within our ERGs, because it's an opportunity for them to have exposure to senior leaders in the company. And it's actually a leadership development opportunity to lead an ERG. So I think it's enough. You need people who are passionate, because again, they're doing this work on their own time. Mm-hmm. So if they don't have passion, it's not going to work. But I think it's a great opportunity to develop leaders and to be intentional about it by giving them those opportunities.
Love that. How about you, Sarah?
Yeah, I've implemented a quarterly give back to my ERG leaders. So I brought someone to talk about how to articulate your value, and then also another time, like how to motivate. And so making sure that they also feel that they're getting something in return, because similar to Monica, you know, there is no financial compensation outside of recognition with their leaders, face time with our executives, our CPO. So a lot of it is just making sure that they're also getting opportunities to continue growing and evolving as leaders, and they can take those skills as they continue navigating their careers.
Nice. I like that. All right. That's wonderful. Erin has been on fire in this chat. I'm going to have to look. Erin and I need to connect. Such great stuff that you're adding. So Erin asks, this is a good question too. What do you believe is the difference between North American approaches to DE&I and that of global human rights? This is from an anthropologist. Anybody?
So Sarah does it globally. I don't. So I
So I will say that politics affects DEI. I can say it's safe to say, to me, Monica will agree, that whatever's happening affects our work. So when Japan, recently passed something about same-sex marriage, or whatever happened in Europe, I'm always making sure, hey, did we update our HR language? Did we have communication go out about this? So I'm constantly always keeping in touch with what's happening globally. Now, to your point about global human rights, I have received complaints over the course of my career about business activity in certain countries based off their human rights records. And this is something that as a D&I professional, I will trickle up to leadership. I bring that up. I will also bring it up to legal. And the people that need to know about these complaints will know. Whether that's going to change business, I cannot say whether it will or will not, but it's always important that the voice of the employee is heard. And so it does affect, and I always appreciate hearing from employees, and I laud those employees that bring up their concerns. And that's just something I love. I will bring up to our CEO, COO, as well as legal in my monthlies with them. That comes down to sometimes ethics. That just comes down to inclusion of our employees and whether they feel like it's safe for us to even be operating there, and do all of our employees feel safe there. And so we always want to prioritize the safety of our employees. And so that always ends up it can lead into other conversations with our people team. So I kind of hope that answered the question in a politically correct manner, but it can get very tricky when we're talking about global human rights and what countries choose to do and what they define as right or as wrong. And that goes for North America as well, right?
Yeah, so I would agree. I mean, if we come across human rights issue, we have those in the States as well, right? That's not one that D&I tackles alone, right? That's where we make a statement, where we take a position as a company. That is a bigger decision than just this group. I will say for sure, we are so US centric when we talk about D&I here. And I'm constantly reminded every time I'm having calls with colleagues abroad too, that we need to understand where the baseline is for each company and each country, right? It's so different. Take LGBT issues. Here we're talking about, let's go do self-ID campaigns. We need people to really speak up and be proud and be open and own their authentic self. We can't have that same conversation in some parts of Europe, right? Literally, our colleagues will say, I can't come out. I don't feel safe. I've worked here 10 years and I haven't said anything to anybody. So I think looking at that and just not making the assumption that whatever we're trying to work on, no matter how impactful we feel in the States or in North America, because there's so fewer countries here, that isn't the same baseline in Asia, in APAC, in EMEA, and all of that. So I think putting that lens on to say, we're going to tackle this differently. It's just sort of like the ERG focus, right? You could have these 4 pillars, but everyone's going to do things a little differently. Some people, it really is just about, I just want that equity of experience. I just want to know that I have, I'm okay to be where I am. I can't worry about showing up and, being an advocate just yet, right? So I think there is a big difference. And I think we have to look at every country. Now, we can't treat everything outside of the US the same either, right? Because it is so very different. And my colleagues remind me that every single day.
I want to add a quick anecdotal story too. I think it's also important when we ask our employees to travel if they feel comfortable going to certain countries. I've had some of those cases cross my desk where sometimes people don't feel comfortable going or they want protection. And so making sure that when we frame things to our employees, again, going back to words matter, making sure that they feel comfortable and that we are cognizant of that.
I'll add, at the core of what DEI is, right? This exists in every country. I know it looks differently, and when you think about the history, especially in the US, what our country has been through, we're laser focused on race, right? But at the core, diversity means differences. And we all have differences. So no matter what country you're in, no matter what country your company is in, are you thinking about how people, either personality differences, physical ability differences, any kind of differences, and are you building an inclusive environment where different people can contribute to their fullest and show up as their authentic self? That exists everywhere, right? The issues present differently based on where you are on the globe, but this concept of creating spaces where people who are different in how they think and how they operate and how they process, how they make decisions, that's something that should be or could be universal.
Wow. Go ahead, Mimi.
Oh, no, I was just saying 100% agreed.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. Let me ask this last question from Erin, and then I will turn it over to my colleague, Danielle, to close, because I think this is a really important question. It's kind of giving back to you in a way. And Erin asked, this is a joyful and tough work. how do you set and maintain personal and professional boundaries to stave off race and or identity fatigue? Thanks for that question. I'm taking notes, Erin says.
I have to laugh because I struggle with that. I like how Monica and Mimi and I, none of us reacted. It's exhausting work.
Because we don't do it. We probably don't take care of ourselves enough. It is exhausting.
It's exhausting.
I will say this though. We have a community. Like I said, Sarah is my community, right? We literally have said, we just need a time where we just go to each other. That's first and foremost, because there's hardly ever D&I teams big enough for the work that it's supposed to do, no matter what organization you have. So you have to build a network of fellow practitioners in this. For me, it goes back to something Monica said earlier. It doesn't matter how big or how small. If you make a small difference, and Sarah, I know you touched on this too, it's 20 people, you're touching 20 people for that day. I just go back to, did someone feel better or have a better day or going to have a better day because of the work that I do? I'm not trying to change the world. I already said I can do 20,000 things to change the world. I'm not getting there. I look at my company priorities, maybe 10. I look at our resources, maybe 3. And I tell everyone who tries to get into space, you have to be okay that at the end of the day, you might have maybe like checked half of a box, right? And you have to be okay with like the super nebulous part of D&I. So for me, it's tough work, but I mean, how many people try to get into this work and say the work matters and I'm making a difference? And if my fatigue at the end of the day is something I choose to do because it is making a difference, yeah, it's good enough. I don't know if 5 years from now I'll say the same thing, but I think just looking at a bite-sized chunk and saying, have you made a difference for one person today?
Love that.
I will say for me, my mornings, I read the 5 a.m. Club by Robin Sharma years ago, and I think my mornings set my day. I'm a high energy person, but I'm not at the end of the day. I'm exhausted. So when I wake up in the morning, that's Sarah time. And Erin, you said you're taking notes. So wake up a little earlier and meditate, do whatever it is that you need to do to help center yourself and get ready for the day. And that's when I might have to do some quick things online. I work out. And so I give myself a little bit of time for myself, because the minute I open my phone or email, I'm gone. It's like I become another Sarah. And I don't have time throughout the day. It's meetings, it's 30 minutes with one issue, the next 30 minutes is another issue. And so my mornings are sacred. And then I try to bake in at least 1 or 2 nights a week where let me put my phone away in another room and make sure that I am processing. Because I think I'm willing to bet Monica and Mimi are like me. We go from one thing to another, we're not processing. And so I have to create time to process, or else I'm not going to even show up and be my best self at work to be able to serve the communities that I'm representing and the work that I'm doing. So I've had to learn the hard way to make sure that I care about that time.
Karaoke nights, it's in our future.
I'm with you, Mimi. Let's do it.
Yeah, look, and I'm 53 years old. I have 3 kids in college. I love to entertain. My husband and I go out to eat a lot. So I have learned how to separate work from personal life, and I go out with girlfriends. I work out. I love entertaining and bringing people over. I'm like the neighborhood party person on my street. So we have block parties and we put out music and dance. So, you just have to, you can't, I hate when people say this, but we can't boil the ocean. We know we can't. And no, you could work yourself till the end of the day. You're still going to have a desk full of work the next day. So you just got to pace yourself, because you're always going to have a lot of work to do.
Love that. Casey, any final thoughts on this before we turn it over to Danielle?
One of the things that I'm like listening to folks, because some questions got real big, right? They got really big. And I think one of the best things is, well, where can you lend your talents and your skills? Right? It doesn't necessarily have to be that you're taking over and transforming. Sometimes it's like, well, if you see, I don't know about y'all, but sometimes I've been in organizations where there's one person dedicated to DEI. They're expected to do everything. And so what I do is like, hey, I'm a trainer and facilitator. What can I take off your plate? How can I help? Right? Like, is there a spot that you want me to plug into? And with my racial identity, I'm like, are there white people you want me to talk to? So they stop coming to you. Right? Which seems so small. But like, I know for the people I'm in deep relationship with, like that's mattered for them. And so to me, it's like, well, I don't have to be leading it, steering it, driving it. I just want to be a part of the movement. And I want to do that in ways that's like helping folks who are leading. And so just thinking about that. And I think, for self-care, I always think we can't ignore that there's joy in this work too. The level of intimate relationship that we get to build with like fellow practitioners I was a very traumatized, not trusting anybody kind of person. I got involved in this work and I was like, wow, we know each other's like deepest, darkest insecurities and like how they show up as we're trying to lead, and we're supporting each other. And so I think that there's this piece too of just remembering, like like very much like Monica said, like have the neighborhood over, like have a big cookout, have like the music playing, let people dance. Now I feel inspired to sing, just that loop. But it was just like recognizing too that like, yes, it's hard. Yes, it can feel like a slog, but it can also be some of the best work you ever get to do.
Bravo. Wonderful. So true. So true. And again, you're all my heroes. Adore you all. Okay, Danielle, sorry I went over. I stepped in a little bit of your time, but I'm going to pass it over to Danielle to wrap us up.
No, that's the good stuff. I just want to say, I wish we could, I think this was echoed in the chat, just do this for hours, although I know you all have things to get back to and at home, but I could just listen to you all talk for so long. I really appreciate it. Another wisdom-packed session. Thank you so much. And for those of you that are still on, I have just a few announcements if you'll hang tight with me. The first is that this session was recorded, thankfully. I'm excited to re-watch it tomorrow. I will be sending out an email with the recording and the chat log. So stay tuned for that. Before the end of the day tomorrow, I'll be doing that. We also have, I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Our next panel discussion of the quarter Q2 is going to be exploring the dimensions of DEI. And we're working right now on confirming our panelists for that, but you can register for this webinar for April 27th, same time, 3:30 to 5 Pacific. Sherry's going to include a link to register for that in the chat right now. Also, we are super, super excited to announce that we're launching a DEI micro-learning training program in partnership with Blue Ocean Brain and Credly. We have 4 distinct levels that are the building blocks to create an equitable and an inclusive workplace that helps you contribute also to your professional growth. You can access over 900 micro lessons that are not just in the DEI space. This is a wonderful tool. We're super excited to have it. And I'm going to go over in a moment 3 different tracks for you to get involved in this kind of training. But I also wanted to mention we have a discount for you all today, 15% off we're offering to our DEI community through this month, through the end of the month. So just make sure to put in DEI Leader 22. But one of the ways that you can get involved in this is through our facilitated track, with the help of our awesome moderator today, Casey Tonnelly. And this is going to be going through the lessons yourself on your own time, but you'll be able to meet as a small cohort every week for 90 minutes and really go into a deep dive into the lesson for that week. And Casey's going to lead that discussion every week for 6 weeks, and then we'll take a break and start the next level and do another 6 weeks. This is going to be an awesome 12-month program. We'd love for you to join us. And it also is approved for 36 HRCI credits. So if you're an HR leader and you are a part of the HRCI group, please note that we have some recertification credits available to you. So that's the facilitated track. Secondary, we have this on-demand self-paced track. Maybe you're someone that, due to time constraints or just personal preference, you want to go at your own pace through the micro-learning lessons. And so you can choose between a 3, 6, or 12-month subscription and still earn those DEI credentials on your own time. So that's the second way to get involved. And last but not least, if you're just, you want your own customized program for your teams, we would be happy to talk with you. And
Awesome.
we are actually working on that right now for an organization using this microlearning platform. And you may want facilitation included or not, but we'd be happy to speak with you. So Sherry's going to provide a link to learn more. And also don't forget 15% off if you want to sign up for the month of February. But on that note, I just want to say thank you to our panelists. These folks here are so committed, so dedicated that especially taking the time out of their work days, their evenings to be here it means a lot. And they've been doing this for us time and time again. Every time we have a panel, I usually knock on their virtual door and I ask them to join us, and they without hesitation say yes. And I just want to congratulate you all for the amazing work you're doing and sharing that with this audience, and for just the transparency too and willingness to talk about hard things. So thank you everyone for being here and for listening to my announcements. Have a wonderful rest of your week and look out for my email tomorrow.
Yay, thank you everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, community. Missed you.
Bye,
Appreciate it.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.